Hello, my friends. It's your buddy Phil here, project management trainer and coach. We got a few questions in from one of our friends, Krishnan. Krishnan asks a number of questions in this email. I want to tackle them one by one. So, Krishnan says, thanks for a very informative session yesterday. Couldn't wait for Q&A, so here are my questions. First question is regarding control schedule and close project or phase. Control schedule, he says. As a part of project documents updates, the risk register can get updated based on the risks that may arise during schedule compression. A potential risk response may also get updated. Suppose I'm new to a project and I start executing control schedule directly after taking over the project. I may have to look at the risk management plan to find out ways and means to deal with the newly identified risks while performing compression. Question: why is risk management plan not an input to this process? Or should I extend the schedule management plan to include how to address risks arising out of schedule changes? That is a brilliant question, Krishnan. Very good question. Because at the end of the day, there are several things in the PMBOK guide that are not perfect. I know everyone thinks that the PMBOK guide was written by some super intelligent race of aliens, but that is not the case. The PMBOK guide was written by people like you and me that have flaws, that forget, that do not put it all together in the context of real-world student questions. You see, it's easy to write a book, but it's hard to write it in student mode. And that's why whenever these books are published, the PMI looks for a group of people that will do a dry run of it and ensure it makes sense. So with that said, there is a lot of stuff in the PMBOK guide that does not make absolute sense. Some parts of it may cause you to wonder what on earth they're talking about. However, let me point out to you some very important language in the PMBOK guide which will help you calm your mind regarding some of these questions. All right? So first of all, why don't we go to page 222 in the PMBOK guide, and let us go to the part towards the end. Okay? It says, the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs of this process are depicted in figure 6-22. So if you take a look at that figure, for those of you who have not studied to the degree that Mr. Aya has, you can see that the item under inputs, item 1, does not contain the risk management plan. See that? Now, if we go to the next page, it says, updating the schedule model requires knowing the actual performance to date. Any change to the schedule baseline can only be approved through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. And then it says control schedule as a component of the Perform Integrated Change Control process is concerned with determining the current status of the project schedule, influencing the factors that create schedule changes, reconsidering necessary schedule reserves, determining if the project schedule has changed, and managing the actual changes as they occur. So the third bullet there, reconsidering necessary schedule reserves, that in and of itself is a risk management mindset activity. You cannot work on reserves if you do not know what has gone wrong or what needs to be accounted for by using those reserves. See? So without a doubt, there is some element of risk management associated with controlling the schedule. Okay? So let's establish that. Now, to further underscore what he's talking about, if you go to the output, the project documents updates, and you go to page 230, the second to the last bullet, it states, the risk register and risk response plans within it may be updated based on risks that may arise due to schedule compression techniques. See that? And if you really think about it, risks could be schedule risks, cost risks, scope risks, quality risks, procurement-related risks, resource risks, stakeholder risks. 360, you're surrounded by the element of risk in every knowledge area. So this should not come as a surprise to those of you who have been reading through the guide, right? All right. So with these things established, I would like to call your attention to the first input again on page 224. Under control schedule inputs, the first one there is project management plan. What does it say? It states project management plan components include but what? But are not limited to. What does this tell you? You are meant to be considering every plan as is relevant to your work as the project manager. You see that? It's not enough for you to go by what is listed in those bullets, because on your specific project, anything can happen. Now, I know you might say, well, I expected that the PMI would have at least gotten all the possibilities straight. Nope. They do not always get all the possibilities as you have identified them as a student straight. And let me just let you know, there's several things I requested be updated in the PMBOK guide, be changed. That was because I was one of the final reviewers and I read through the book, but of course I didn't catch everything, you see. So I'm saying all of this to let you know, 1, your question is valid. 2, you're not meant to consider just what is on the page as inputs to control schedule. You should consider everything. Okay? Now, I want to backtrack just to give you some additional context based on the argument that you've posed. So let us go back to page 181, and then we'll proceed forward, because you talked about extending the description in the schedule management plan. I wanted to be clear about what is in the schedule management plan. So on page 181, we know that it includes control thresholds. It is those control thresholds that enable us know when to take action such as schedule compression. Now let's go to the third bullet from the bottom on page 182. It says, variance thresholds for monitoring schedule performance may be specified to indicate an agreed upon amount of variation. You see that? An agreed upon amount of variation before some action needs to be taken. Thresholds are typically expressed as percentage deviations from the parameters established in the baseline plan. See that? Great. So when you look through what is in the schedule management plan, you do not see anything that categorically tells you about the management of those schedule risks. You see what tells you about associated actions such as control thresholds, right? But you don't see anything that guides you specifically about those actions. So where do you get that information? As you correctly pointed out, it is in the plan risk management process that you craft this how. It is in the plan risk management process that you decide upon what they call impact scales. The definition of impact scales is done in the plan risk management process. So if we go to the plan risk management process to unravel what is in the risk management plan on page 405, what do you find? Risk strategy, the general approach to managing risk. Then it gets narrower in the risk methodology. That now tells you about approaches, tools, and data sources used to perform risk management. Then it goes into roles and responsibilities for the risks, funding for the risk events. And by risk events, I'm talking about risk management type events, okay, or risk management type activities. Then the timing is also discussed. But where it begins to get tailored towards your aspects that you mentioned is in the risk categories. So we could say schedule risks or financial risks or scope risks or whatever, what have you. And these fall under specific buckets, as you can see in the sample risk breakdown structure there on page 406. Now going to the next page, the last bullet on that page is definitions of risk, probability, and impact. It used to be called definition of impact scales, because what you're doing is defining scales for measuring risk. And what do you see? The third column is time. In other words, schedule. So talking about schedule risks, how to assess them as high, medium, low, how to qualify them, that is in the risk management plan under the definitions of risk, probability, and impact. So you are right in thinking that the control schedule process should have some sort of influence coming from the risk management plan where necessary. You see what I'm saying? So where necessary, of course, you should be going back to your risk management plan to look at it and say, what was our approach to dealing with risks of this nature? You see, because it is still tied back to risks. And you are right in thinking in that vein. That is not an incorrect thought or assumption. In every one of those processes where you are monitoring and controlling, there is, of course, a possibility that you may be involved in risk management within that area. But the actual place where it is done is not in the control processes per se. And that is why when you take a look at Chapter 11 in the PMBOK guide, and you go to the control risks, or the monitor risks, I should say, process, you get an idea of what is really happening. That is where those risk actions you're talking about are actually implemented, because they are risks, even though they are schedule risks or cost risks, they are still risks, you see. So if we're talking about risk exposure of any type, we are really looking at this as a risk management activity. So while I totally understand what you're saying, the process where you are handling the risks is not the control schedule or control cost or control quality processes per se. You are handling these risks as part of the monitor risk process, because that is where all risks get tracked. Risks get tracked and managed as part of the monitor risks process. You see, if you're going to carry out any action, corrective action or preventive action, it is not done in control schedule, even though it has some integrative properties with risk management. It is actually seen as a risk management affair predominantly. And that's why the PMI probably did not want to muddy the waters by extending risk activities of a certain nature to those controlling processes. Now let's wrap up. We've spent a long time talking about this, but I am hoping it is going to be useful to you and others to help clarify why there is not a lot of risk activity in those controlling processes. So let's go to page 453 and let's take a look at monitor risks. So what does it say here? It says, monitor risks is the process of monitoring the implementation of agreed upon risk responses, tracking identified risks, identifying and analyzing new risks, and evaluating risk process effectiveness. You see, this is the hub where it all happens. You see, so even though there is some influence and inference to other areas, the place you're really monitoring the risks is right here. And part of the information that will permeate into this process comes from all that WPI. So the work performance information you get from control schedule and from control cost and from control anything, that's why it is whittled down into a report. And from that report coming in here into monitor risks, you know the state of affairs in schedule, cost, scope, quality, resources, procurement, stakeholder communications. Anywhere there is a potential risk, your WPR should serve as a check. Your WPD will capture unexplored data for you to unravel what best to do. And that's why in monitor risks, you can see WPD and WPR coming in, because it's that WPR that has all of the analyzed existing work performance information coming in here through the work performance report, which assembles all of them and includes the most relevant of the WPIs. You see that? So it all comes together here. And this is where you ultimately ask the question, did it work? Because in implement risk responses, you've already carried out your response for schedule risk. You've already carried out your response for cost risk. You've carried out your response for scope risks. See that? So let's go to the next page. I want to show you a bullet really quick here. On page 454, the second bullet from the bottom. Okay? But let's read up there. It says, the monitor risks process uses performance information generated during project execution. Did you catch that? the monitor risks process uses basically work performance information generated during project execution and assembled in your work performance report, if I may add, to determine if, let's go to the second to the last bullet. I'm going to read it all at once. The monitor risk process uses work performance information generated during control schedule to determine if contingency reserves for schedule requires modification, and if the project strategy is still valid, and if the level of overall schedule risks has changed, and if new individual schedule risks have emerged. Do you see the line of thinking here? So if you're thinking in this vein, Krishnan, you go from thinking about control schedule as the place where you should assess schedule risks to actually realizing that these schedule risks are no different from other risks emerging from other areas. And the hub where you are technically doing this is not control schedule, even though in control schedule you may identify something that needs to be included as a risk. But where it is actually analyzed and where you actually put this new risk to sleep, if you will, or take action on it, it's all in the risk management knowledge area. Now, this has taken quite a bit of time to explain because you know that risk is huge and far-reaching. Okay? So when you finally take a look one more time at the control risk process, if you take a look at that mention of the risk register one more time, I want you to look at it with a renewed understanding of what exactly they're talking about. It says, the risk register and risk response plan within it may be updated, not necessarily here, but it may be updated based on risks that may arise due to schedule compression techniques. So if you carry out schedule compression and it leads to a risk, put that in the risk register. But where is all the action taking place? It's taking place in the risk management knowledge area. You see, within monitor risks, if you will, because it's in monitor risk that you identify new risks. You see what I'm saying? You don't identify new risks in control schedule. You may want to attach it to the schedule knowledge area, but the actual process where you identify all new risks, whatever their nature, schedule, cost, scope, anything, it's in the monitor risks process. So understanding that will definitely help you as you're studying. Okay? I hope that answers your first question because you have two questions. For this first question, we've spent 23 minutes. This has got to be one of the longest questions that I've ever answered. But I hope it adds value to you, and I hope it expands your understanding, and other folks watching, I hope it does the same for you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on another episode of Questions and Answers with your buddy, Phil, called Fastfacts. Speak to you later.